Okay, well, it's 9:03, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you to our attendees for making it today. This is a jam-packed webinar, and this is around 2021 risk management planning and how to move forward. So, Sinead, why don't we move forward on the slides, if you will. Just some quick housekeeping. This is workers' comp focus as it has been. There is definitely going to be conversation around safety and Cal OSHA compliance. And oh my Lord, the changes with the CDC. I know Anthony's going to get into that versus OSHA. What a mess right now, my friends. And then the framework for the COVID risk management, and certainly, we expect a bunch of Q&A, and there is the Q&A button and the chat button. So please feel free. If you've got questions, log on to the Q&A section, and we'll try to address them as best as possible through the webinar if we can move forward, Sinead. Okay, so here we are today. I am Joe DeLucchi. I am the president of Cal Insurance. What we do, Cal is coast to coast. So we advise clients, our business clients, our schools, our nonprofits, our real estate investment groups, and our successful families across the United States. And so we design and advise on those particular insurance programs. We have just a tremendous, outstanding, can't say enough, partnership with ESM Insight, Anthony Poston, who is the CEO, and just all things when it comes to OSHA compliance, COVID compliance. They are an outstanding partner to Cal and Cal's clients on the workers' compensation side of things. And then the lady who really runs the show here for our webinars and is going to be running the polls, Sinead Soapy. Good morning, my friends. So it's jam-packed, and we're just expecting folks to take some nuggets, take some tools out of this as they will. It's going to be around safety strategy, not just COVID. Let's get started. These are messy times, Anthony.
Yes, they are.
So we can see here, my friends, everybody that's joined us, and we've had some people that I think have made all 9 webinars, and we appreciate that. This is our 9th. Believe it or not, since all of the craziness happened, this is our 9th get-together, and you can see just the recap of everything that we've spoken about. Let's move forward. And Anthony, do you want to take over for today's topics?
Yeah, so we're going to dive into the new Cal OSHA COVID regulation 3205. We'll talk a little bit about AB 685 and some travel guidelines. Those were taken from our prior webinars. You've probably seen some of this content, so we're just going to breeze through those. And then we're going to get to the second part, which is more about risk management planning beyond COVID-19. And then we'll talk to you a little bit about what's on the horizon for ESM and Cal and some of the new features and tools that are going to help employers become smarter about administrating the safety and workers' comp program. So as Joe mentioned, it is jam-packed. There's lots of information in here. We only have you for an hour this month, so we want to try to give you as much information. We're recording this. We'll send you the slides. So if you can't take notes fast enough, don't worry. You're going to have both of those files that you can review and start to strategize on what 2021 looks like, which hopefully, has some light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. So bear with us as we go through all this content, fire your questions away, and if we can't get to them, we'll be sure to take note and we'll respond to you in a timely manner. Sinead, let's just start rapid fire going through this. All right, California's Code Regulation 3205. Sinead, why don't you start with the poll?
All right, so we'll launch this poll right now. Are you familiar with the new Cal OSHA COVID-19 prevention regulations 3205? Go ahead, yes or no. We'll give everybody a couple moments. See some response.
They get bonus points if they can name the other code regulations that OSHA
has. Right.
There are a lot of numbers out there.
I think last year they only had approved 2 new regulations, and this year we just have this waterfall of regulations, and there yet to be more, I'm sure, coming in 2021. Let's see what the responses are.
All right, let's see. So we're kind of split down the middle, or kind of like a 60-40. So
we had some shy folks. Some people didn't vote this morning.
Yeah, it's early. We get it.
It happens. We have some more, so you'll have a chance to vote later on.
Redeem yourself. All right, let's go to the next one here. Well, for those of you who said no, you're in for a treat. So let's start going through what this new regulation requires. Before we go into that, if you recall in one of our last webinars, we talked about one of our employers who received a letter from Cal OSHA regarding alleged conditions. And I just want to point out a few of these because these relate exactly into the new standard. And you can see the third bullet, employer does not enforce a 6-foot physical distancing policy. The fourth bullet, employer has not installed partitions at assembly tables. And if you look at the California Code of Regulations, Title 8, CCR 3203, A3, A4, and A6, this was all injury and illness prevention program related. So anytime Cal OSHA was trying to enforce a citation or a penalty against an employer, they leaned on the IIPP. Well, now we're going to see some of these bullets play out in the new 3205 regulation, and California and Cal OSHA has a lot more teeth that they can now enforce this. But before we go into that, I will tell you that there's going to be a lot of flexibility per the division manager, that they understand that the complexity of 3205 is going to be a difficult challenge for employers to comply with, let alone not even considering that we have to run a business and try to keep our people safe, not just to comply with this new regulation. So let's dive into it. We're not going to go through the entire thing. It's a 21-page document. You can see the link down here, which will link you right to this page. It's 21 pages. We have combed through it significantly, and I've taken out some of the highlights, and that created a checklist for you to use to cross-reference against your existing exposure control plan. And if you don't have an exposure control plan, be sure to call Joe, be sure to call me, because we need to get you ramped up pretty quickly. So let's dive into the key components here. So it has 5 parts, and we're just going to cover part number 1 today because that is the bulk of it. The other 4 parts, as you can see, they talk about COVID infection outbreaks, a major outbreak, which is 20 or more cases, talks about prevention and employer provided housing, which I think most of the employers on here probably don't provide. And then the last component is transportation to and from work. If you're providing that, then there's an additional standard that you need to comply with. So if any of these, especially the last 2, apply to you, take a look at the link, read through the documents, and if you have any questions, be sure to fire them off to us. But let's focus on section 1 here, because it has 11 sections. And I know some of these words are overlapping, kind of the wrap text, but we couldn't fit all of it on one slide, but I wanted to make sure we did. Otherwise, we'd have more than 100 slides in this deck. So the number 1, system for communicating. This is what is going to be required under Cal OSHA. And I'm going to show some highlights of some of these different sections as we go through these next few slides. Number 1, system for communicating. 2, identifying and evaluating COVID hazards. 3, investigating and responding to those hazards. 4, correction of those hazards. So that falls right in line with what the IIPP is, the 8 elements. Number 5, training and instruction. And now we start to see the components that are more related to COVID, which is physical distancing, face coverings. Number 8, other engineering controls, which includes providing partitions, floor markings, and other workflows to mitigate the exposure. Number 9, record keeping. 10, excluding COVID cases out of the work site. So if somebody's sick, making sure that they don't come in. And then we've got some return to work criteria, which has been totally thrown upside down with the new CDC requirements. And we're going to talk briefly about that. Try not to confuse you any more than what is already going to happen in this presentation, but just know that there's going to be a lot of changes. So make sure you tune in next month for the next iteration of this webinar, as I'm sure we're going to have more guidance on both Cal OSHA and CDC.
Things are moving so quick, as we know.
Yeah.
Very rapid speed.
All right, Sinead, let's go through. Let's talk about some of the definitions. Now, there's more definitions in this new standard, but I just wanted to highlight these 4 because these are critical as you read the standard or the regulation, I'm sorry, and you're updating your own exposure control plan. These are important definitions to understand. Number 1, a COVID-19 case. This is basically somebody who's got a positive test, they're subject to an isolation order, or they've died to COVID. Those are the 3 components of a COVID-19 case. So if you hear that, just know that that is basically somebody who's positive or somebody who's passed away. Number 2, COVID-19 exposure. Being within 6 feet of a COVID case for a cumulative total of 15 minutes or greater in a 24-hour period. Well, the CDC just came out with a change in their definition of close contact, which is an aggregate of a total of 15 minutes. So if you see somebody who's COVID-19, you're within 6 feet multiple times throughout the day in an aggregate of 15 minutes, that is considered a COVID-19 exposure. So we're going to have some conflicting regulations coming from the CDC, coming from Cal OSHA. There's not a lot of sync up on what's appropriate, and this is why we say it's so messy. And most importantly, if you have a specific case that you need to deal with, not a hypothetical, because we've been dealing with a lot of what if scenarios, but if you have a case and you need to walk through that decision tree analysis, be sure to call Joe, call us. We'll get on the phone and kind of walk through what you need to do in order to comply, as well as quarantine and keep the rest of the team safe. Number 3, COVID-19 symptoms. You can see this list just continues to expand every month. So basically, if you don't feel very well, it might be COVID, call in. Nonetheless, these are the definitions. So this is how Cal OSHA is now determining some of the additional requirements for COVID-19 exposures, cases, and so forth. Now, the high-risk exposure period, persons who develop COVID-19 symptoms from 2 days before they develop symptoms until 10 days after those symptoms appeared and 24 hours have passed with no fever, without the use of fever-reducing medications, and symptoms have improved. And the second high-risk exposure bullet here is for persons who test positive, who never had COVID-19 symptoms, again, from 2 days before until 10 days after the specimen, after the first positive test. So rather confusing language. This is how regulations are written. Nonetheless, if you have a sick person, make sure that they stay at home, quarantine, and then we'll talk through what's going to be required, which again is going to contradict what the CDC requires. So Cal OSHA has got some interesting updates, and now the CDC with their updates as of today and this week. They
And
totally
this
conflict
is
with
and
each
this
other.
is maddening for employers, right? I mean, you get conflicts here, and it's really comes down to just, you got to do the right thing, right, Anthony? Do what's
Yeah.
do what's best for the organization. Try your best, and if you're putting forward your best foot in trying to comply, I think there's going to be a lot more mercy than a hammer from an OSHA organization, right?
Absolutely. We're going to talk about all the documentation and how important that is to ensure your affirmative defense. So, Sinead, let's jump in a little bit deeper here. So let's talk about some specific components of this 3205 regulation. And I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. Again, if you have any questions, be sure to contact us. But this first one, 3205C, Section C, is that an employer has to have a written COVID-19 prevention program. We call it the exposure control plan. And now that can be an addendum to the IIPP, it can be embedded in your IIPP, or it can be maintained in a separate document. I recommend a separate document because at some point this is going to fizzle out, and then you can just remove that from your requirements, and you'll still have your standalone IIPP and other components of your safety program. Sinead, let's go to the next one here. Investigating and responding. The employer shall offer COVID-19 testing at no cost to employees during their normal working hours to all employees who had potential COVID-19 exposure in the workplace. That's a new one. So I encourage you to contact your benefits provider and find out if they are offering those tests. Maybe they're offering them for free. If you're the employer and you have to pay for those tests, you might just be paying for the copay. So it's unclear how that's going to play out, but I encourage you to reach out to your benefits providers or your benefits broker and talk about, or your Cal advisor, and talk about what some of the options are, because if you have to provide that at no cost to the employees, there should be a plan around how you're going to do that. Now, the second portion of this responding is give notice of potential COVID-19 exposure within 1 business day in a manner that does not reveal personal information. This also relates to Assembly Bill 685, which doesn't go into effect until January 1st. So now we have this 3205 standard that's effective immediately, as in today, and we have to give notice of the exposure, but then we have 685 that doesn't go into effect till January 1. So there's a bit of contradiction there.
And this is where people get confused too. I think I've had a lot of questions about, okay, well, we don't know if the person really has COVID, right? They suspect it because their roommates, boyfriends, friend at another, where does the line get set for employers, Anthony? I mean, that we get this day in and day out, and
Yeah.
it's so convoluted, right? I mean, is it that, that the employee has COVID and that's where it draws the line? Or is it because they might have been exposed because of someone's boyfriend in another place and they were over here? Where's the line drawn?
Yeah, that's a great question. That exact scenario we've been working through with another employer where the boyfriend works in the medical field, gets tested every week. Come to find out this 2 weeks ago on Monday, he's tested positive. Meanwhile, the girlfriend stayed with him all weekend. So that's a high risk exposure point. And this is right before Thanksgiving. So per the Alameda County requirements, she had to quarantine for 15 days. Now, that 15 days starts from the last time that she saw him. Well, then we move into Thanksgiving, and we don't know if she saw him again. So if she saw him again, then the 15 days resets. So it becomes very confusing. Nonetheless, as soon as we found out, We had her quarantine, leave the office, but now because we didn't think that she had visited anybody or talked to anybody in the office within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, she always said 5 minutes. Well, now with the CDC changing close contact, it could have easily aggregated to 15 minutes if she talked
Right.
to that same person for a few times. So this is why it's so confusing. And again, if you have these situations, contact one of us or both of us, because we can kind of help you walk through, what the requirements are going to be, because we'll have to look at county requirements, CDC requirements, Cal OSHA requirements, and we've become pretty well versed in helping you to navigate that. So don't think that you're alone. Make sure that you reach out to Cal, reach out to ESM. We'll be sure to hop on the phone and help you kind of walk through that decision tree. Okay, Sinead, let's roll on here. Training. Most of you are probably already doing this. You have to train about COVID-19. You have to train about your policies and procedures. You have to talk about specific public health information about COVID-19. So this one, I would say that probably 99% of employers are compliant. And if you're that 1%, make sure that you use some of the training documentation that we've provided. It's on the Cal site, it's on our site. Train your employees and continually refresh that training. If you haven't trained anybody until since May or June or July, that's stale information. So you've got to continue to train employees, get signatures on a form. That is going to be your affirmative defense to help you comply with this new standard. Let's go to the next one here, Sinead. Face coverings. This is a good one. Employers shall provide face coverings and ensure employees wear those over the nose and mouth. How many times have you seen people not wearing it over their nose? That's that's not a face covering. So over the nose and mouth when indoors or when outdoors and less than 6 feet away from another person. In the same paragraph, anyone not wearing a face covering or face shield should be at least 6 feet apart from all others, unless the person is tested at least twice a week. Well, here in the top one, we're saying you have to enforce it and ensure employees are doing it. And then in the bottom one, we're saying, well, if they're not doing it, then make sure they're 6 feet apart. So again, we've got some contradiction. Again, what you need to do is just make sure employees are wearing your face covering. They just need to wear it. Simple as that. Make sure that you're enforcing it. There needs to be some documentation around training on that. And then if you see somebody who's not wearing a mask, that could be a disciplinary procedure. So take that with a grain of salt. Some of this is going to be subjective. We get it, but just ensure that you're continuing to train employees on the importance of wearing their face covering. Other engineering controls. So as I mentioned in that alleged letter that our employer got, under this new C8 section, the employer shall install cleanable solid partitions that effectively reduce aerosol transmissions between the employee and other persons. And that's at fixed work locations. So if you have assembly tables, or if you're working in an assembly line, as an example, or you're working in the public and you are engaging with various customers. Make sure that you have those partitions. We've seen them everywhere. They're at coffee shops. They're spread across everywhere. The hard part is, can you get them? And so just procuring those can be even a challenge right now. So again, put your best foot forward, make an effort, document your efforts. Again, you're going to help comply with this new regulation. All right, exclusions. Now, anyone who tests positive or anyone who's exposed to COVID-19 must be excluded from the workplace. Employers must continue to maintain an employee's earnings, seniority, and benefits through either their sick leave benefits or public benefits or other means. So this middle one is kind of a tough one. Anyone exposed, and this goes back to Joe's point. How do we know? Given the rampant increase in cases, chances of being exposed are extremely high just going to the grocery store.
Right. I
So
mean, it's the definition of exposed here, right?
right. So it's a challenge. So again, we don't want to go down these different rabbit holes. If you have a case, if somebody comes and says, I might have been exposed, then we need to take action, right? Whether it's the girlfriend staying at the boyfriend's who's sick, whether it's somebody at home who's sick. I just got an email from a good friend whose daughter's 18 and she got COVID and she had to quarantine in her bedroom for 2 weeks. Luckily, the rest of the family didn't get it. But it is a very big challenge for so many people right now, and not to mention, the deaths that have occurred because of it. So continue to keep your guard up, put your best foot forward, have documentation on all of your efforts, and that's going to provide some relief and going to provide your defense against any potential OSHA exposure. Which, by the way, in the last webinar that we talked about, Cal OSHA is hiring 60 new enforcement officers, and they're probably going to hire more now because of 3205 and all the complaints that have been coming in. So there's just a bigger enforcement agency from CDC, Cal OSHA, California Department of Public Health, emergency responders, police, fire, they all have authority for an OPU, which is an order prohibiting use. So if you're not putting your best foot forward and any of those agencies feel that there's a bigger exposure, they do have the authority to shut those facilities down. Okay, let's keep rolling on. And I hate for this to be doom and gloom because I feel like that's all we we talk about anymore.
Now we have
Um,
another change too, right? Now it was 14 and now it's 10, no?
This is the
Work
the
side.
messiness of it. So the CDC just came out and said they're going to reduce the quarantine period from 14 to 7 to 10 days, and that you can come back to work if you have a negative test on the 7th day. Well, here we can see in this return to work portion of the regulation, just at the very bottom, a negative COVID-19 test shall not be required for an employee to return to work, which contradicts everything the CDC just said. So, and you can see as we move up to the top here, workers with COVID-19 shall not return to work until at least 10 days have passed since symptoms first appeared. Those who have tested positive but have no symptoms shall not return to work until 10 days have passed since their first test positive. So again, a lot of conflicting information. Again, I can't iterate this enough. If you do have a case, if you do have a concern, contact us so that we can kind of walk through what your decisions are and what you need to do. And we've got a lot of various forms, templates, letters to send to help comply with this regulation and 685. So we've got a lot of resources for you. And just trying to give you some highlights just so that you can see the importance of having a plan, executing the plan, and training employees on the plan. Let's keep rolling here. Now, to help you along your COVID journey, we went through the entire Cal OSHA 3205 standard and put together a checklist for you. It's a 4-page checklist that goes through each one of those 11 elements that we talked about. And I put each one of the requirements in the form of a question. And so Sinead is going to be putting this in the chat. It's available to customers in our Insight portal in a Word format. We have to put it in a PDF in order for us to share it. But nonetheless, this is a great system, a great checklist for you to go through with your team and just start to answer the questions. Yes, we have it. No, we don't. And then obviously for the no's, then you can start to put together a plan on how you're going to shore that up. Recall what I said in the beginning, that there is going to be flexibility from the division, the Cal OSHA division, that if you're, as long as you're putting your best foot forward and you're making a good faith effort, as they say, then they're going to be very lenient and they're going to be flexible because there's a lot to manage from this new standard. So use this checklist as your North Star to kind of navigate towards making sure that you have a compliance program in place. Most importantly, that you're taking every effort to keep your people safe.
So Anthony, let's just go real quick about offer the COVID test at no cost. Could it be that the employer would just reimburse the employee, right? The employee goes out, gets the test, there's a charge, I don't know, $50, let's call it. They come back and the employer says, hey, I'm just going to reimburse you for that. Is that in compliance then?
I would think so. But you don't want to just have an open-ended checkbook for anybody who wants to go get tested. So there's got to be a reason, right? There has to be an exposure. And what is an exposure? As we talked about the high-risk exposure, we talked about the COVID-19 exposure of 6 feet, for 15 minutes in aggregate.
Yeah.
So there's got to be a reason for reimbursing employees. And again, this is why I was thinking about John Ryan and your team about if medical providers are providing those tests at no cost, then essentially it would just be the copay.
Right.
And I don't even know if they're requiring a copay. So there's a little bit of homework for employers, but nonetheless, if there is an exposure, there is a requirement for you to provide the test at no cost. Now, what test do we provide? That begs the question: is it the Abbott Lab rapid test, or is it the 2-day, 48-hour test? So again, we can get into debates on which one is more effective, but I have a lot of people telling me that the Abbott Lab is the rapid test is not as accurate. Right. Nonetheless, it's a test, and so we have to lean on the the fact that the test is proven and that it provides a result. And so if we start questioning all of the tests, now we're back at square one of determining whether or not this is a compliant program or not. Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to move us forward. Here's another form. If you haven't seen this before, we also put together this employee acknowledgement form. It's in English and Spanish. You can download it in our Insight portal, or it's right here. There's a link. Sinead will provide this as well. So as I mentioned before, refresh training consistently, right? We've got the new regulation. We've got constant changes. We've got travel guidelines. There's so much happening right now that you need to continue to communicate with your employees and have documentation on that communication. As we talked about that alleged letter in the very beginning, we had put together a timely response. We had to respond in 5 days. This employer gathered all the documentation. They have a high frequency of communication, high frequency of training, a very active exposure control plan, put all of that into a response, provided the documentation, and discredited every one of those allegations. And we were able to close that case without any further investigation within 3 weeks, which is excellent because that doesn't always happen. In fact, I would say that only happens probably 20% of the time. So this document, the document I just shared before, it shows that you're going through the process of identifying hazards, correcting hazards, and training employees on those hazards. And that is core to not only the injury and illness prevention program, but this new COVID-19 prevention standard 3205. Okay, Sinead, we'll keep going here. Let's talk about 685 really quickly. As I mentioned, this new 3205 standard, I don't know if it trumps, you know what, I'm not going to say the word Trump. I don't know if it supersedes the 685, but nonetheless, we have to now communicate with our employees, that have been exposed within 1 day. Sinead, let's go to the next one here. We'll just talk quickly about this.
First, we're going to let everyone redeem themselves, though, with
Yes.
another poll. So
Excellent.
I'm about to launch a poll. I'm just going to interrupt here. So let's give everyone a chance. Have you prepared your employee notice as required by AB 685? So do you have this letter already created? Yes or no? Getting some responses. Everybody's
Don't be
warming
shy.
up. Yep.
It's anonymous. Don't worry. We're not going to open your video camera.
All
All of us
right.
are in sweats anyway.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got.
All right. So it looks like everybody is in the right spot. 88% no.
All right.
Okay.
Which is okay, because that's not in effect till January or December 31st.
But good and best practices to
Right.
to have it ready to rock.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, no, and with 3205, you have to do it. So nonetheless, basically 685 just got fast forwarded to today. So Sinead, let's go to the next one. Let's just talk real quickly about it. We have lots of information on Cal's site, on our site about 685. We did a whole webinar on Senate Bill 1159 and AB 685. If you didn't see that, go to the Cal site, make sure you watch it, just get up to speed on what you need to do. This AB 685 law, essentially the essence of it is if you get notification of from a qualified individual, and a qualified individual is a positive COVID test case, and there's a realistic possibility that other individuals within the worksite could have been exposed, then you need to notify those employees within 24 hours of their rights to sick leave, non-retaliation, FFCRA requirements. And if you don't do that, then Cal OSHA can issue a serious citation within 5 days without any rebuttal. And those serious citations could start at around 18,000. There's an additional exposure about the outbreak component, which is 3 or more cases within 2 weeks. And you have to notify the local health department as well as Cal OSHA within 48 hours of that. Now, that contradicts 1159 to make this more confusing, where you have to report an outbreak to the insurance carrier, which is 4 or more cases. But the CDC and Cal OSHA say if you have 3 or more cases, you need to notify the public health agency and Cal OSHA, within 48 hours of that knowledge. Now, this has expanded Cal OSHA's authority even more. So we got 3205, we got 685, we got 1159. God knows what else is going to happen in the next month and a half, 2 months. So nonetheless, we're going to make this really confusing and messy so employers just have a really difficult time managing this. That's pretty much kind of sums up what's happening with our regulators right now. So let's go to the next one here. So here are some specific details about 685. I covered most of these. You're going to get these slides. I encourage you to review them with your team. Sinead, let's go to the next one just so we can keep moving on. We told you there's going to be a lot of information here, a lot of resources. Here's a sample AB 685 notice. Sinead's going to post this in the chat as well. This is just an example. We've just put together some basic verbiage versus what the 685 requirement is. There's still a lot of homework for you to do. By no means can you cut and paste and insert information into those yellow sections and call it a day. So I encourage you to review it with your team, have this document ready. should something happen, you can now use this document to communicate with your team. And that coincides with 685 and it coincides with 3205. So again, there's some homework for you to do. Make sure that you audit your exposure control plan using that audit checklist, prepare your sample notice, just get all of your ducks in a row. So if something occurs, you can just pull that out of your file, get that out to the appropriate people and take action therefore. Shade, let's roll on here. So I put these two slides in here just to remember this. If you have a positive case, you need to notify the carrier. Now you need to notify the carrier if there's a case that is potentially work related and it's just an exposure. If it's just an exposure and there isn't a positive case, I'm sorry, let's back up. If you get notice of a potential exposure and there's no positive case, you need to report to the carrier using their form the information about that exposure, but you keep the personal identifiable information confidential. Now, if you do have a positive case and the employee says, I believe it's work related, you give them the DWC1, file that with the carrier's form. So if you don't have those forms, call Joe, call his team. They can help get those forms from the carrier and make sure that you have that in your toolkit. The second piece is I've had a lot of conversations with employers about when do I notify my employees about a potential exposure? And think of it this way. If you're an employee, wouldn't you want to know if you were potentially exposed? And I had a great explanation. I was talking to a behavior threat assessment expert, and he said, we're all in this storm together, but we're all in our own boats. And we don't know what employees or people are going through at home. Multifamily generational households, we know there's more exposures to that, especially in the Bay Area. So if there's a potential exposure, and as Abe on our team said, in the spirit of the law, you don't want to withhold that information. If you withhold that information so that somebody can't make a personal decision on what they need to do, that's not going to bode well. So you do have a moral obligation to notify your employees if they are potentially exposed. Now, this is only the affected employees, right? If you have two different offices and one office has an exposure, you don't need to notify the other.
And again, this doesn't apply to remote employees as well, right? They're 100% remote. None of this applies.
Right. But just think of it. If you do have an exposure, there's actions you need to take. Communicate, be transparent in the spirit of the law, and look out for your people. Let them make informed decisions on what they need to do in order to keep themselves safe and their family and their communities. Okay, let's go on here. All right, we're going to breeze through this real quick as well. Travel guidelines. California Department Public Health put out their requirement: more than 3 households are prohibited. Look at number 7. If singing, chanting, or shouting at your get-together, strongly encourage physical distancing and face coverings. And as one of my good Italian friends said, well, this just precludes every family get together for the Italian families.
That's right.
I know Sinead and Joe, you have the Italian heritage, so it puts a damper on some of the Thanksgiving and the upcoming holiday sessions.
It's passionate talking. It's not yelling or
Right.
using loud voices.
Oh, my wife is Italian. They're from Sicily. The singing and chanting and shouting, it's just normal behavior. Okay, let's go to the next one here. So we're going to go through this. We also provided some travel guidelines for you. Business travel, has been basically cut, suspended until further notice. But if people are going to travel personally, we just put together some guidelines, some recommendations. Make sure you keep your guard up, right? From airlines to public transportation, if you're staying at a hotel overnight, what personal protective equipment do they need to provide, CDC and TSA guidelines. We put together this little travel guidelines toolkit for you. Again, it's just an example. You can modify it. Make sure that you just send that out to your team as another communication. And there's been a lot of dialogue around, if my employee travels and they come back from a flight to a hotspot, do I have to have them quarantine? Well, California, Oregon, and Ocean have band together and put together some travel advisories, which is another link here that you can review. So there isn't a specific requirement. The CD says that they recommend quarantining for 14 days. That's now changed with this new update in close contact and the quarantine period. So it's in a total state of flux. But what I would recommend is you just communicate with your employees that traveling poses a bigger risk. And if you're going to do it, make sure that you take the appropriate PPE precautions. So let's go to the next one here, Sinead. Here's some additional safety tips that we put together. We put together our own safety travel holiday. Sinead put this together. Thank you, Sinead. We've got the CDC recommendations for this holiday season, and TSA know what to know before you go. So again, more tips that you can share with your employees. There isn't a requirement to do this under any regulation. It's just more of a best practice and a reminder to folks that we're not out of this. And everybody sees the news. You can't escape it. We've seen the increase in cases. So if people are going to travel, can't tell them they can't prohibit it, but you can help them stay safe during the process. All right. Let's talk about something non-COVID. And I found this photo and I thought it was just so ideal because we're gonna get through this. There is light on the other side. And we've got the vaccines. If you heard us talking before, Britain had just fast-tracked emergency approval of Pfizer's vaccine. So they beat the US to the punch, which is okay. But nonetheless, it's going to put pressure on the US regulators to approve it as well. And we're going to start to see that roll out. And so there is hope. And so what we've been trying to talk to employers about is one, being very vigilant of COVID, given these new regulations. But two, we also have the traditional exposures that are constantly within our organization.
And best employers, employers understand that. I hope, and I hope, all employers, are keeping their eye on the whole safety prize, if you will, because, that's going to affect the workers' compensation. And employers, good employers, I would hope all employers want their employees to show up to work and leave work in the same condition they showed up in, without the injury at the workplace, because the ramifications can be quite difficult for an employer overall. And so while COVID is important, not shying away from your overall safety initiatives is imperative.
Yes, definitely. We put together this safety program for you as an example. And this is something that I'm actually taking an example from an employer that we implemented this, and I'll show you the results. So we put together just kind of the high level goals of what we wanted to achieve with our safety program. We wanted monthly safety committee meetings. Our goal is to reduce injuries and exposures, reduce our workers' comp insurance costs, reduce our XMOD. We wanted to get more participation in the safety program. We needed to ensure that we had Cal OSHA compliance goals, just to ensure that we are in compliance, but also using those goals as standardization and training, and that in turn will help reduce some of the injury exposures. We wanted to develop a relevant training schedule and material, not just, hey, let's train on fall protection, even though we don't have any fall exposures, right? Making sure that we are targeting our training around our loss leaders. So we need to do some data analysis in order to determine, hey, if our goal is to reduce our slips and falls, because that's been our 50% loss leader for the last 3 years, we want to reduce that by 25%. Let's really focus on where the slip and fall exposures are and run campaigns around slip and fall awareness. We wanted to make sure we had an employee safety handbook. So we'll talk about that. And then also additional safety initiatives to raise awareness. And that included a safety recognition program. So this was the framework that we had put together with an employer, high level. First safety meeting, what do we want to achieve? How are we going to get there? Okay, let's go to the next one, Sinead. So we put together kind of the company's needs. One, we wanted a 3-year plan to lower workers' comp risks and costs. And Joe can attest to this. We fully anticipate workers' comp rates go because of COVID, because of the fires, because of the hurricanes and everything else. So
I think to a degree, Anthony, in the sense that the Commissioner Laura just a few days ago rejected any COVID surcharges. So there originally were supposed to be 4, then there were supposed to be 6. The commissioner for California said there's not going to be any COVID surcharge. Now, the carriers still can surcharge, however they want in the back end, because they have flexibility within their filings within California. But I expect actually workers' comp costs for the beginning part of 2021 to remain favorable to employers. It's been an excellent 5 years for employers. Rates have continued to go down dramatically. If you looked at what an employer's workers' comp costs were rate-wise, 5 years ago versus where they are now, it's dramatically down. Now, the things, though, that they can control, of course, is the experience modification. So, and that's the important part right here that I definitely want to highlight. But rates are, I think, still going to be favorable in the beginning part of 2021 for employers. Now, it will end at some point, right? But I think for the short term, and I know you're talking long-term strategy, for the short term, it still remain favorable for employers.
Yeah, one thing that we've been talking about internally is expected loss rates. And because of COVID and fewer losses, will those expected loss rates go down per class code? So if you're expected to have fewer losses and you have more than expected, your mod's going to jump up. And we've had to deal with this with a pretty large employer where they had one of the best years ever from a safety standpoint. And because of the prior 2 years continuing to increase and the expected loss rates going down, even though the payroll was flat, their mod went up.
Right.
And so it's really making sure that you have a story, and a plan, kind of the North Star I talked about that you're working towards.
Absolutely.
And with the X mod, it's such a lagging indicator. We're going to show you how we look at more key performance indicators on a monthly basis to keep you focused on that long-term strategy. So as we can see here, they had intentions of growing, so they wanted to reduce their costs on the workers' comp side, which would allow for reinvestment into the organization's benefits as well as profitability and to increase their growth strategy. Looking at a different risk management leadership. So we had a good team, but they weren't trained on how to manage risk. They were managing their specific departments, but we needed organizational alignment so that we could achieve these greater goals. We wanted to make sure that we leverage data. So looking at different data points, understanding the data and using that data to develop safety intelligence strategies. And then also, how can we leverage technology more to implement a cohesive organization-wide strategy? And for this employer with the mod that was increasing pretty substantially, we need to rewrite the story. So we had to train these managers to be new authors of this new story, all aligned to a specific organizational goal. And we call that enterprise risk management. When you start to look at the organization's goals, you align your risk management strategy to those, as we talked about. You want to grow? Okay, well, we need to cut workers' comp costs. If costs do go up in workers' comp, in the future, we're going to have to offset that expense somewhere. We sure don't want to have an increasing X mod as those workers' comp rates go up. So making sure that we're thinking long term. And this is what I mentioned about getting out of the COVID mindset and kind of looking long term. And I know it's been a very short term, day by day interaction, with management and employees, but starting to strategize what it's going to look like after this is really important. Let's go to the next one here. So here's a couple of exercises I'm going to provide to you. This is a great way, your first safety committee meeting, or even now as you prepare for January, just do a SWOT analysis. What are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and talk through with your managers about that with regards to your safety program. Those weaknesses, I can tell you, having done this, I don't know how many times with employers, as we do this each year, those weaknesses become fewer and fewer, and the strengths, the list just gets stronger and stronger. Obviously, we're going to have threats like Cal OSHA, new regulations, COVID. Who would have ever thought COVID would have been or turned into what it is today? But what are some opportunities as well? So use this as just an exercise to go through with your safety team and start to come up with what those weaknesses are, maybe what some of those threats are, even opportunities, and start to look at how you can strategize and turning those into strengths. It's just a great exercise to start getting organizational alignment. Here's another one that's another great exercise. Risk maturity levels. Where are we? We're going to do a poll right after this. So let's just talk about this for 2 seconds. This spectrum starts with the ad hoc organization, where we're using organizational risk management in a singular event. Something happens, we put together a plan. The second stage is we're starting to think through risk management a little bit more, starting to have a plan. We're starting to implement it a little bit more. And stage 3 is we're beyond the early stages of that implementation and thought process. We're starting to build a framework, and it's being used regularly, and it's using consistently, and we're starting to see results. In the fourth stage, we're really managing it. We're skillful in understanding risk to our organization. We've trained our folks. We've got good processes and procedures. And then we move into the level 5, which is leadership. That's that enterprise risk management. We're using risk management as a framework to help our organization reduce risk, reduce variation, reduce costs, which is helping the organization to grow, expand, provide more benefits, or expand geographically, whatever that specific organizational strategy is. So as we kind of work through that, I'm sure you're already kind of thinking where you're at within your own organization. So Sinead, let's run the poll. And this is a second opportunity to redeem yourself if you do not participate in the prior poll.
This one's a beast too. There's a lot of reading, yes. But just focus on the different levels. And I have this open too for multiple choice. So if you feel like you're kind of in between any of those levels, you can definitely choose more than one. So we'll give everybody a few moments. Let's launch that poll.
So you're in the beginning stages, you've started to implement, you do it consistently, you're skillful in managing it and understanding it and leveraging it. And then in the last stage, you are incorporating that into your overall operational strategy.
I think businesses are going to be all over the place on this here.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be on size of business too, quite frankly.
Definitely. Absolutely.
All right, so we're getting, it's kind of at like a standstill right now. So we'll end the poll and share the results.
And there's no wrong answer, by the way.
No.
Okay, so 20%, 20%, 40%, the 2 out of 5, the leadership level. That's incredible. Great
Yeah.
job. And I typically see the majority of organizations in that 2 to 3 range. And so, Sinead, let's close the poll. Let's move to the next one. So, as you start to think through this a little bit more, what are some key initiatives that are going to help you move to that next level? You started with the SWOT, you recognized weaknesses, maybe some opportunities, maybe some threats. And so, how can you start to turn where you're at in this level into your next opportunity, moving to that next stage, that next level? So again, you're going to get these slides, use these as exercises and just think through it. Doesn't take that long, but what's great about the SWOT, what's great about this risk maturity level is that you're starting to get organizational alignment. And when you come together and say, these are the 5 things that are going to move us from level 2 to level 3, level 3 to 4 and 5 and so forth. Now you've got action plans. It could be implementing your COVID-19 prevention plan in compliance with 3205. That's a big action plan. Maybe we're not training our supervisors. Maybe we're not doing inspections. Maybe we haven't developed good workflows or good worker training. Whatever the case might be is take 3 or 4 initiatives for this 2021 policy year. Let's say 4, 1 a quarter,
Yeah.
and become excellent at them. That is the best way to move the needle each quarter without having to take on this huge mountain of responsibility. Sinead, let's move to this one. All right, so for you data lovers, we analyze a significant amount of data, especially for large employers who have a significant amount of claims. There's a lot of data points that we like to look at, and here are the 10 categories and the 29 different data points that we look at. We take all of this data, especially for organizations that have 20, 30, 40, 100 claims a year, and we start to look at some of those trends in that analysis. And then we drill down into where are our loss leaders, what day are these happening most, what department, what supervisor, kind of looking at all of those different trends and then really honing in on, okay, we recognize that this is where the majority of our injuries are happening. This is when they're happening. We're going to build safety programs and awareness campaigns on mitigating those on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, depending on the size of your organization. That really helps you kind of take this big nebulous idea of how am I going to implement this program and then drilling down into specific action items. So we're looking at data, we're talking to our team about strengths and weaknesses, we know where we're at in the risk maturity level. Now we can start to put together our game plan for 2021. And let's move forward, Sinead. So here's some examples. For those of you who are Cal clients, we put together our claims management reports. This is what it looks like for our larger customers. And you can see we look at in the middle section, these 3 years that are impacting the XMOD. And so here we've got 4 years of data. This 5th year, we've had one of our best years ever. And it is definitely a correlation between the program we put together, the awareness campaigns that we're running, and just the management's leadership and understanding risk and neutralizing it. So we're tracking all of this data. And Sinead, let's go to the next one here. Now that we have this data over the last 4 years, we'll say, we know what the averages are for those 4 years. And so when we look at the averages, we say, okay, we want to reduce these averages by 25%. Let's set some goals. And so here are the goals that we established. This is a real case study that we wanted to have less than 7 injuries. We wanted to make sure we had 90% monthly training completion. We wanted to have 12 safety meetings, 100% of our injuries reported on time, 25 or lost days, and $100,000 or less in claims costs. Let's go on here. I'm going to move us through this kind of quick because we're going to run out of time. So you can see we put together this KPI dashboard, and each month, excuse me, too much coffee. We put together this dashboard and we track each month. We get loss runs from Joe from Cal as an example, and we look at where we're at versus our goal. And here is the results within this first year. So we wanted to reduce our severity by 25%, reduce our frequency by 25%. We had kind of a lag time issue with reporting. We wanted to make sure we were training our team and we measured that, and we wanted to manage a number of lost days through a return to work program. And you can see we've achieved this pretty significantly. Let's go to the next one here. And here are the results. So we had a 46% reduction in frequency, 85% reduction in severity, 35% reduction in indemnity claims. And despite an XMOD that was going up 89 points over the last 5 years, because of this program, because we got the loss control manager involved from Everest, the carrier, Everest came back with a $50,000 discount on their workers' comp premium. So even though they have an increasing mod, they don't have a great history, having the carrier involved in the process, looking at these monthly KPIs, continuing to move the needle forward, we were able to get a pretty significant discount. on the insurance workers' comp costs. And now, fast forward to where we're at this year, we've only had one injury this year, and they're an essential service. They have not reduced payroll or employees. And so we have had fewer injuries than ever before. And because we have organizational alignment, there's just been a lot of participation at every level. Let's go to the next one here, Sinead. So here's a template that you can use, again, as an example with your own safety committee. We're kind of working through the different process and how you get to this. Let's go to the next one here. Here's an example of a safety committee and what the responsibilities are. So I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly just so that you have the tools and just you've got a lot of resources to help you craft your 2021 strategy. Next one here. If you are trying to determine whether or not you are in compliance, we put together a comprehensive safety compliance checklist. So there's all the tools that you need to say, do we have hazard communication? Do we have a COVID-19 plan? Do we have safety committee meetings? Yes or no? Big thing about this is if you have all this documentation, know where it is. And centralizing all that documentation will help you accelerate any kind of audit requirement. So making sure that you're tracking all of that, but you also have a central storage for it as well. Next one here. For those Insight customers that are on the call, we do have all of our learning plans. We're continuing to expand these. So these are great learning plans for administrators of the safety and workers' comp program. They're about 15 minutes. You get a badge, you get a certificate, and Sinead likes to say we like to bribe you. So the more certificates you get, what is it, Sinead? We give every 4th certificate, we give a $20 Amazon gift card.
Yes, for every 4 is that $20. Bribery, it works.
Hey, the holidays, I'll take $20. My kids need some new toys.
We've had a flurry of learning plans being completed this month.
You wonder why,
Starting.
right?
We're only 2 days in.
All right, let's see the next one here. As far as training, here's an example of putting together your training schedule. So do a training a month, and a training can consist of this 1-page document that we're showing you on the left, on the right side. We have a lot of these already built out for you, but nonetheless, having a training doesn't have to be a big, extensive 1-hour training. It could just be a specific topic around a specific exposure related to your loss leaders, again, lined up with your overall organizational plan on reducing risk and cost. Let's keep moving here. An employee safety handbook. Many of you have an injury and illness prevention program. Some of you probably have a code of safe practices. We like to call this the employee safety handbook, where we combine all of that into one document. And this helps satisfy about 75% of the typical Cal OSHA standard or regulation requirements. So putting all this program into a module will help you provide one voice to the employees. Here's our safety handbook. Here's our HR handbook. And so by providing this information, you've standardized that process. And again, you've created that singular voice and how you communicate the importance of the safety program. Keep going here. Inspections. If you're conducting inspections, don't just conduct them to check the box, but have a plan with them. We've created various scorecards for employers. We look at various requirements. If we're looking at different job sites for construction, we measure those job sites. We tie those into the profitability of the job site. For example, if you're continuing to have PPE violations, that's going to be a $500 chargeback to that site. If you have an injury, it's going to be $3,000 chargeback. If you have a Cal OSHA violation, it's going to be a $5,000 chargeback. So it helps keep the managers aligned to managing risk, because the more risk you have, the more cost you have, inevitably, when you have injuries or incidents. And if you're trying to leverage technologies, we showed you the different learning plans that we use. We also have tools like JotForm and GoCanvas. You can create your own custom digital inspection checklist. And then you have that on your smartphone, your tablet. The inspector can go out, complete the inspection digitally. When they're done, they click submit, and then that can reroute to the appropriate parties. And then you can start to track that from a data standpoint. So some great different tools that you can use to leverage in managing your safety program. Digitizing it is going to be so much easier, so then you don't have to have a bunch of paperwork. You can file all of that electronically. And Sinead, let's just keep going here. The last one, the Safety Recognition Award. So we talk a lot about top-down safety approaches, but there's nothing like bottom-up, where you're rewarding people and recognizing people for going above and beyond the safety program. And this is another great recognition tool. Give somebody a $20 gift card for going above and beyond the safety minimums that you've established. And those go a long way in increasing the participation of the safety program. It's a moment of delight, as we like to say. Okay, Sinead, we'll keep going through here. One of these last few slides, the safety program timeline. So now you've established your plan, you've established your risk, what your game plan is, put together a timeline. Here's what we need to do on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, depending on your size, or semi-annually, but at least have a plan and a timeline. And now you can back into calendar requirements, just making sure that you're adhering to those. Sinead, let's roll to the next one. Here's an example of a tool that we use. It's called TaskRay. This is for our customers. We're going to actually be putting this in our Insight portal for our customers, but we track all of the major requirements or milestones for each one of our projects. And so as we move forward through the policy year, this is our whole customer journey that keeps us on track with delivering our services, managing expectations, and also keeping our brokers and our clients aware of all the activity that's happening through that policy year. So really creates a nice customer journey that's very transparent, very visible. Next one here. Okay, last one, employees' commitment. Employee has to commit to this as well. They have a responsibility of putting safety first, adhering to company policies, participating in safety trainings, providing feedback, most importantly, reporting all injuries, no matter how minor, at the time of occurrence. That will allow the employer to get appropriate medical treatment, which will reduce the exposure of severity, kind of that long-tail result of a claim that goes unmanaged. All right, and let's get to the next one here. So we have this whole theme of moving forward in 2021. We've got some great new features that we're going to be rolling out, new learning plans in our portal. We talked about TaskRay, our new task management system. For those of you that were helping to manage workers' comp claims, we're going to be putting all of that in the portal. So everything will be accessible. You'll be able to track real time what's happening with the claims as we get updates versus our quarterly reports. And then, as I mentioned, new learning plans, new webinars. So we are all about moving forward in 2021 with technology, providing employers resources with managing these exposures going forward. And as far as January is concerned, with our upcoming webinar, we're going to talk about workplace crisis intervention. As we start to bring people back to work, we know that there's going to be some mental health concerns and challenges. And so we partnered with Hector Alvarez. Hector is a long-term partner of ours. He is a behavior threat assessment. He's got his master's in forensic psychology, has his BS in criminal justice. He's just a great resource for employers to help kind of manage and determine those specific behavioral characteristics that might run a risk to the organization, identifying those before they turn into something more challenging. Okay. Sinead, I'm going to throw it over to you to close out. I know we're a little bit over time. We got started a little bit late, so if you just hold on for a few more minutes and then we'll get you on your way.
That's good. So just like the slide says, we're here to help. Obviously, there have been a tremendous amount of resources within this presentation, and we have many, many more within our Insight portal itself. We actually have a complete extensive COVID-19 library as well as many others. This is just an example of some of the resources that are within that. Everything that is within this presentation today, those links, you can definitely hop on and see some examples of those. They're all in PDF form, but all of our Insight users and many of our Cal clients have full access to fully edit all of these different resources. So they're great ways to act as those frameworks so that you can build and document your process to become safer within your organization following all of these new guidelines. This goes over our annual subscription cost. So Insight is a subscription service. It's an online portal that you can gain access to. Our Cal customers do get a discount through the end of the year. So definitely, if you have any questions, reach out to us and we'll be there to answer them, as well as anyone on your Cal team too. We will be sending over a survey as well. You'll get it at the end of this webinar. So if you can just take a few moments, there's about 4 questions. I promise it'll take less than 2 minutes. There's also a question on there asking if you wanted to have any more information about our Insight portal too. So definitely keep an eye out for that, as well as any of our future webinars that we have slated moving on to 2021. I can't believe we're almost at the end of this year, but we'll be continuing to pump out some content. And then also within that survey, you can put some examples of anything that you want to learn about too. We are open to all suggestions. So with that, I will send it over to you, Joe, to close out completely for the rest of the webinar.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Sinead. I know that there were a few extra questions there. I will get back to Rosalinda and Todd Henry. You also had a need too. I think it's probably regarding the ESM website. Thank you guys all for participating today. We appreciate it. Be well. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.